rock solid. Oh, you lovers, stand with me. Rise in spirit, oh, you lovers, rise in me. Sing together, oh, you lovers, sing with me.
Hello and welcome to Elemental Castings. My name is Thorn Coyle. This is my bi-monthly, approximately, podcast in our tour through the sacred elements of life: air, fire, water, earth, and ether. I'd like to start off with a prayer. Let's all take a breath. Holy Mother, in whom we live, move, and have our being, from you all things emerge, and unto you all things return. So today we will be working with the element of fire, the element of healing of the creative spark, the element of the passion of our magic. And I have in the studio today Scott Rowe. Scott Rowe has been practicing Chinese medicine since 2005 and also completed postgraduate study in Tianjin, China in 2008. While in Tianjin, he had intensive clinical time rotating through the stroke recovery and men's health departments at the Chinese Medicine Hospital there. He has a practice in San Francisco and also sees patients 1 day a week in Sacramento. He is an initiate and student of the fairy tradition and is exploring the intersection of Chinese medicine, Taoism, and fairy. And you can find him at rootbranchom.com. That's ROTBRANCHOM.com. And also at sacramento-acupuncture.com. And as usual, you can find me at thorncoyle.com. Thanks for coming on in, Scott.
Oh, thanks for having me, Thorn.
So, when did you begin to study magic?
I began to study magic in 1990. I was a freshman in college, and it was just something that had been kind of in the back of my head all the way through elementary school. Something didn't feel quite right about my religious upbringing, and so I started to study magic and the fairy tradition. It seemed actually the first tradition that I discovered was fairy, and I've pretty much stuck with that all along. Wow,
that's kind of amazing because so many people have such a hard time finding that tradition, and you found it right away.
Dumb luck, I guess.
Did your magical training influence your decision to study acupuncture and the healing arts, or had you been interested in the healing arts before that?
I think that it did. Especially in the sense of kind of being encouraged to pursue my passion. Mm-hmm. I really think that it did influence my training or my decision to study magic, and then go on from there. I spent 8 years as a professional chef, mm-hmm. And realized that I'd been helping people, but I wasn't really healing them. Mm-hmm. And since I realized that I'd had a lifelong interest in herbal medicine, I discovered that through that I could find Chinese medicine as an appropriate outlet for that. And then the acupuncture part of it was really simple from there. Mm-hmm. So it was really the pursuing my passion and that excitement of that. And when I found that I could really help people, and when I discovered what a powerful modality Chinese medicine is, it really helped me make that decision and stick to it.
I think that one of the facets I find in anyone who studies the magical arts for any length of time is that commitment to following passion. Don't you find that?
Absolutely.
It becomes really important as we uncover the parts of our soul and dive more deeply into our practice and try to connect more fully to deity too, I think. Where do you think passion enters in those relationships? Do you have any ideas about that?
Well, I think that there's the whole word inspiration, mm-hmm. and it's the root means to breathe in,
right?
And so it's the breath of the gods breathing into you, and so you have that, and that is that the air fanning the fire, the air of the breath fanning mm-hmm. the fire of inspiration and passion. And I think that's why the pagan community at large has so many artists. Mm-hmm. And even those who aren't making their living as an artist are still they're still using their art. They're still creative, very, very creative people. Mm-hmm. And I've always expressed my own creativity through cooking, through writing, through ritual. And now I've been very surprised to discover how much I can express my own creativity also through healing, and how much room there is, even within a 2,000-year-old healing modality, how much room there really is for creativity in terms of approaching people and how I can help them feel better and heal through whatever they've got going on.
Well, that seems to be the case in any art, craft, or science, that what we bring to it is what opens it more fully. And none of these systems are static systems, right? They're ever evolving, and they shift according to who is practicing and who is receiving. All those relationships, again, seem to inform all the arts and sciences, including acupuncture.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The introduction of acupuncture to the West has really changed it dramatically as well.
How so?
Well, some of it has been integrating it more fully with Western medicine. There's been a lot of, even though that's been a goal ever since Mao really revived acupuncture. But the other thing is that there's been a lot of MDs, Western MDs, who are getting very interested in acupuncture and how it can help their own patients. It's been there's also been a lot of just people who are, Western healers, energy healers, people who've been exposed to Western styles of healing, whether it's Western herbalism or just, kind of energy healing. And then people have, that there's a huge population of new acupuncturists who have that kind of background, also in massage, also in other sorts of body healing energy modalities. And so their influence has also brought in a lot of beyond just the basics of traditional Chinese medicine, which was not traditional, actually. It was developed in the 1950s by Mao, 50s and 60s, when he needed a medicine to treat, 900 million at the time people. And so what people have done then is they've gone back and re-explored some of the roots of Chinese medicine. And Chinese medicine, what I refer to as classical Chinese medicine, is much older than TCM. I mean, it is the roots. It's based on the classical texts. And it goes back and it includes things like the emotions, which TCM is not able to fully cut out, but it has reduced it fairly significantly. There is also some of the more spiritual aspects, which, you kind of go from the physical to the emotional to the spiritual, all being, it's kind of a continuum if you look at the classics. But of course, in modern medicine, we've got this mind-body duality,
right?
This very Cartesian approach to it. So I find that with classical Chinese medicine, I can address people's spiritual concerns. I can address people's emotional concerns much more fully when I get beyond just the a little bit more rigid version of TCM that I was taught in school.
I love that your description of TCM versus classical Chinese medicine, the traditional, that came through Mao's time, versus the classical. You're also describing contemporary paganism, right?
Well, if the shoe fits.
Right. So here we are part of the new religious movements trend, and we are, forming something new in this 21st century that, started, some of it maybe as early as the 1930s, but certainly the 1950s and 60s. Yet we are drawing on very ancient classical pagan texts and roots from all over the world. Yet it's this truly contemporary thing. And just listening to you describe that evolution, I had to laugh. You're describing the rise of contemporary paganism. We've gone through such a similar process. And I'm wondering now if that's something about our time, that these old systems are being reformed for the coming age.
I think it is. I think that what we're looking at is we're feeling a need to connect with our past, and we're feeling a need to go back to very old systems of healing, of worship, of just ideas that worked for our ancestors, and they touch us very, very deeply. They touch that part within us that is very close to our heart. At the same time, we're not wanting to go to the what we see as simplicity. I mean, we still, a lot of us are scientists.
Right.
A lot of us care very deeply about not becoming people who are very dogmatic. I mean, I think that we're faced with that all over the world, and especially in this country recently. We're faced with this dogmatism, and it makes us very uncomfortable. So we're trying to blend the new and the old, and trying to reconcile, for instance, ancient Chinese medical advice with modern Western medicine, or ancient pagan forms of worship with modern sensibilities and the scientific method.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's far more interesting to me than trends we also see of romanticization of the old, as a preferencing the old over the new. I really prefer this synthesizing that we're doing, Oh,
absolutely. Absolutely. I always crack up at the people who talk about the continuation of an ancient religion for thousands and thousands of years, and Wicca is this ancient religion, and no, not so much.
And so acupuncture, we could say the same thing, right?
Absolutely.
It's
Absolutely.
not, was the line broken as badly in acupuncture as it has been in paganism?
No.
There's more continuity?
Acupuncture has been practiced in one form or another for the last minimum of 2,000 years, which is 200 years of since the first texts were available. But there's evidence for acupuncture going back about 5,000 years, which is what the Chinese always claim about their culture. So anytime you talk to the Chinese nationalists about their culture, they're like 5,000 years of culture, or 5,000 years of acupuncture, and well, okay, yeah, I mean you can make an argument for that, but I usually tell people, it's a 2,000-year-old modality rather than 5,000 years, just because it's once people started to write things down is when there was something that we can really connect with,
right?
And something that we can bounce ideas off of and say, okay, well, this is what the classic texts say. How is it valid? How is it not valid? Beyond that, earlier than that, we have archaeological evidence, and I think the same thing is true of paganism.
Sure.
Where you have, once people started to codify, once the Romans started to codify how other people worshipped and how they themselves worshipped, or how the Greeks started codified how they worshipped, we then had something to compare to now, rather than archaeological evidence. I think that's one of my problems with some of the pre-literate cultures trying to reconstruct paganism out of a pre-literate culture, because all we have are some symbols. All we have are some carvings.
Because the oral tradition in most cases was broken.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Usually through war.
Yes, and imperialism and oppression. Yeah. So I want to open up this idea about working with fire, since this is a fire podcast, working with fire, working with energy through this healing mode, which it's a really magical healing mode to me, acupuncture, because it's so closely tied to working with the energy systems of the body, which we as magic workers, we try to train our facility with working with the energy systems in the body and in our etheric and auric bodies, right?
Right.
So I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about working magically with fire through your needles.
Okay. One of the things that I really I try to do is connect with that energy. The concept of qi in the body it's a very and without getting into too much theory, it's a very yang substance. It's very light. It's very movable. It's very transitory, or not transitory, but it can move very quickly. Qi has a lot of those capacities, as does fire, and qi and although they don't share a connection in the strict sense, because fire is an element also within the body that produces heat and light from a Chinese perspective, not the magical perspective. And it produces heat but also can move very quickly, can be both warming but also destructive. And I see, but qi has that more of that quality of what I see as fire, what I see as as fire from a magical perspective of being able to bring warmth, bring activity. It can bring. It carries things with it. In the same way that fire, when you invoke fire magically, it has that both creative and destructive capacity.
Right.
And so what I think about a lot when I'm doing a treatment on somebody is I'm thinking about the energy of getting into the point, finding where the chi is stuck, where the fire is moving, and either it's not actually present, in which case you've got a cold deficient situation, or there's an excess of it, and so chi is the fire of the body. So either the chi is not moving, it's stuck, it's not flowing, in which case you need to bring the chi there and move it through, or it's accumulating in one spot, and that spot is often swollen, excess, often very warm. Cold can accumulate, but especially in our culture, I see a lot more of heat and fire accumulating in, and that's Chinese fire, not magical fire. So I find that I have found that I was working a lot with that sort of fire energy, and it is, fire is just like medicine. Fire is a tool that can be used as a benefit. It can be healing. It can be warming. It can be all those great things. You can cook your food with it.
Right.
At the same time, it can also be destructive. And they say, who cannot heal or who cannot harm cannot heal. That's, that theme keeps coming up, and I see them as both having that same potential.
So I want to back up a minute for our listeners. And so you talked about, obviously the Chinese elements are a little bit different than the elements we use from the old Greek scientific worldview, right? As pagans, that's been passed to us. And I'm wondering if you can make some intellectual connections for us around the difference between Chinese fire and where qi fits into the Chinese elemental system.
Okay. Well, from the Chinese elemental system, I'll start at the beginning. There's the concept in Taoism of the one, of that to borrow the Hebrew term, the prime source, the original thought. From that, it divided itself into yin and yang, and from yin and yang came the 10,000 things, or everything that there is. But and the yin and yang concept is very important to begin with. The way that those 10,000 things are described is being made up of 5 elements. And the 5 elements are fire, earth, metal, water, and wood. So when you look at 5 elements like you're talking about in the series of podcasts, we're talking about fire, water, earth, air, and ether. So there's not a one-to-one correlation.
Right.
Fire, Western fire, or magical fire and Chinese fire are similar, but they don't have quite the same relationship. There are 2 cycles. When you can graph out the cycle of the elements, the Chinese elements, and you can graph them out as being a generating cycle, which is usually drawn as a circle, which is in the order that I described them before. You have fire, which generates earth because of ash. Earth generates metal because you find metal in the earth. Metal generates water because when water condenses on it on a hot day. And then water generates wood because bamboo, which is the largest source of wood, or what we would call wood, in China, grows out of the water. It grows in very damp places. So you have this generating cycle. Then each of those elements control the other. So there's a controlling cycle, which you skip them. So you have fire controls. How does that work? Fire controls metal, because you can use fire to temper metal and control how it's shaped. Metal controls wood, because you can use a metal tool to cut wood. wood controls earth because of the stabilization, and then earth controls water, and then water controls fire. Well, if you graph these out on a piece of paper, you have a pentagram,
Right.
which I think is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
But you were asking me about drawing parallels between the two.
It's okay. We can go far-ranging, because now, of course, I want to bring to everyone's attention, which people have probably already noticed, that here you are talking about this source dividing into two, and of course, in fairy tradition, we have God herself and the divine twins,
That's why
from
I
which
mentioned it.
everything else flows. And of course, in Kabbalah, you have source dividing into two that form the supernals, the top of the tree, from which everything else flows. I just love that these systems are common in different cultures.
And completely independently developed, too.
Yeah.
I think that's really fascinating.
It's when I stumble across things like that, I say, oh, it must be true, right?
Right.
If so many different people have developed it in their own way, and there are these resonances, I find that really exciting.
Yeah, that there are these truths. Truth is a very elusive subject, of course, but to find that these things keep coming up over and over and over again, there has to be some underlying truth to them.
Right.
I can't fathom it being otherwise.
So talk to me now a little bit about using Chinese fire in your healing work.
Okay.
You've talked about it a little bit already, but I just want to unpack this as much as possible for people.
Sure. One of the things that I find in fire is one of those components of all of the everything has its element of fire in it. Just like you have, in the yin yang symbol, to go back to that, you have the light half and the dark half, and then there's a dot in the middle of each of those, which represents yin within yang within yin. Likewise, in the five-element theory, each element contains all of the other four elements within it, all the other five elements, actually, because there's also fire within fire.
And we find that in the Western magical traditions, too. You'll
Right.
have the air of fire, the water of fire, etc.
Right. Which is another parallel, which is, again, one of those fascinating things that keeps coming up. One of the ways that I work most often with fire is in the relationship between the heart, which is the Chinese organ, the heart, is, which may sound familiar, the center of emotions, but also the reason why you can sleep. If there's not enough, if the heart isn't nurtured, you can't get to sleep. It's also about calmness, whereas the illness of the heart is this exuberant joy, this fire raging out of control. They refer to it as, it's translated as joy in the classical texts, but it's more like that speed freak joy. It's the okay, I've got to do this and I've got to do this, and things are crazy and
It's obsessive.
Exactly. And so the heart's natural state is one of calmness and peace, and it's called the emperor of the body. And when they say the emperor is not at peace, the world is not at peace. The rest of the body is not at peace, or the kingdom is not at peace, is the way they describe it. So you can think about that as being also, that has both macrocosmic and microcosmic implications.
Right.
And so you have the heart, and the heart has this tendency to rage out of control. And so I was talking about the controlling cycle earlier, you need the water. Water comes from the kidneys. So you have the water coming up to cool it. And balancing heart fire and kidney water is one of the prime imbalances that I see over and over and over again. It can lead to insomnia. It can lead to asthma, of all things. It can lead to a bunch of different diseases because these two elements aren't in balance. And so when I'm working with fire, I'm trying to either build it up. If there's not enough heat to keep that water warm, the body cools down. So it's about finding the balance with the Chinese medical fire. There's the Mingmen fire, which is the Mingmen is roughly translated to gate of life. It's not a great translation, but it's probably a little bit more useful than the actual translation. which I don't remember. But the Mingmen fire, you need to have that. It's like a steady burning fire. It's the fire that is, it is motivational. It physically keeps you warm, but it's also the heat that provides all the other processes. It helps with your digestion. It helps with inspiration, again, getting back to that. It helps with having the energy to just get up and go about your day.
Reminds me of the Celtic cauldron of warming.
Yes. And I think that I've worked with those similarities quite a bit, and it's absolutely right. It's that, and it's located, the kidneys, although they're physically located a little bit higher, the Mingmen is located about level with the hips. On the acupuncture point is located on either side of the spine, about level with a little bit higher than the hips. So it's like kind of that top of that cauldron, where the fire keeps everything warm, warms the kidneys, and then of course but the water is still cooling to the excessive fire of the heart, and so you have this nice balance and interplay of water and fire to keep you going, to keep your life active and successful.
And of course, that's important in everything in our lives, but including our magic, right?
Oh, absolutely.
The magic worker that is out of balance is a magic worker that's not healthy and not actually very powerful, even though that out of control raging fire, which can also be very supportive of an out of control ego, is really damaging in the long run, both to the singular practitioner and to everyone around her.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's I also find that if they're doing magic at all,
right,
which is the other thing is that somebody who is that manic or who is suffering from the deficiency of that fire, either they're too crazy, they're going out and partying all the time, and they don't have the time to do magic. They may have the energy, but they don't have the time because they're doing all this other stuff, or they just don't have the energy to do. They're not taking care of the basics. They're not nurturing their kidneys. So there's not that just basic heat to get the magic done. And I've known several people who have been through that circumstance as well, where they're like, yeah, I was doing all this magic and now I'm just, or the other side of that is I think we've all had that person who's complaining about what's going on with their life, and you kind of go, well, wait a minute, you're a witch.
Right.
Why aren't you doing something about it?
Right.
And they go, oh, right. I forgot, and I think that forgetting that is also, it's part of that fire burning low, rather than, it's not, the heart is also responsible for memory. And so the fire is also responsible for memory. And so when that fire gets low, you forget very basic things about yourself and who you are, including being a witch.
Yeah. Victor Anderson talked about the four fires: coal or ember, flame, and arc and star. And if you don't have your base of embers, then the wood you're throwing on your fire, on your flame, is not helpful, and vice versa. Those are self-supporting. And then if you don't have those two, that arc of inspiration and the mystical communion of the starfire are also not helpful. And we can get trapped in any of those levels. So that basic supportive work you're talking about feels really vital to all of our healthy functioning.
Absolutely. One of the things that I try to do, getting back to my personal practice, is I'll do kala before an acupuncture, usually before my entire day. I don't always have time in between treatments to do kala, but I do it at the beginning. And one of the things I do is I see it as charging it with that fire. It's basic work, but it is laying that foundation. You have to do the basics.
And for our listeners who don't know what kala is, it's a cleansing rite in which we are charging up water and reclaiming unbound life force and drinking that back in. Right.
And since and often the energy, or usually the way that I was taught, the energy that I'm charging it with is, of course, blue fire. So again, this is one of the ways it ties into my acupuncture practice. Is I've got this in this cup, I have a balance of fire and water, and I'm using that then to go through and cleanse myself. And hopefully, I haven't actually thought about it this way, but I may try to in the future to make that magical connection between my own heart fire and kidney water to bring those into balance.
That sounds brilliant. I really like that idea of it's not only then a metaphysical balancing, it's a very real, visceral, physical balancing. And I try to do that in my own magic work and in my teaching is say, if we're having something awry in our lives or something that we're struggling with, I always try to work on it through both the physical and the metaphysical levels, and both through gross material and energetics, as well as the emotional or magical systems. I want to bring all of those things together. And that's what I hear you saying here.
Yeah, absolutely. As a friend of mine said once, you may know her, she said that we are physical bodies having this spiritual experience, or spiritual bodies having a physical experience. And so you have to, I think that the way that you have the most powerful magic is where you're combining your spiritual experience and your physical experience. And it doesn't come without some combination of the two.
And that is a healing of that Cartesian split you spoke of earlier. Because
Absolutely.
Really there's no difference. It's another thing our teacher Victor would say is the spirit makes the body and the body makes the spirit. Really, they're the same. It's just a convenience for us to say, oh, I'm going to differentiate this system into yin and yang, for example, rather than only speaking of source, right?
Right.
Because the multiplicity helps us pinpoint where the trouble is. But then we can end up creating more trouble by continuing that split.
Absolutely, yeah.
Rather
think so.
than saying, I'm using this split as a convenience so I can come back into wholeness.
Right. I agree. Our brains are designed, and unfortunately we can't experience the world without using our brains. But our brains are designed to differentiate things. Mm-hmm. It's designed to divide things. But when both halves of our brain are working together and they're in concert, all of the parts of our spirit are working together. And I speak of spirit in the Chinese sense, which includes our physical bodies, includes the visceral part of ourselves that is associated with survival. It includes all of our experience as human beings. When they're all working in concert, there is no separation between ourselves or the rest of the world.
Right.
And it's this, it's the state of Satori, or the singular state. And that's when either we can affect the most change or we realize that change doesn't matter.
Right.
And whether that change actually happens is irrelevant. Mm-hmm. And so we have this unity that comes about through that. And I think that separating the two, it's always important to be able to separate the two halves, but then it's always important to be able to put them back together. Mm-hmm. And whether you divide into one or into two or into three or into 5 or 10,000, it doesn't, it still needs to come back to that unity.
Yeah, I agree. So when I receive acupuncture, I'm aware of many things simultaneously. I'm aware of the state of my body, my emotions. I'm aware of what it feels like when the needles enter. And then I'm aware also of what happens to my energy systems when the only way I can describe it is I feel like the needles start to connect with one another. There's some communication in my systems energetically with this fire we're speaking of. Mm-hmm. I feel the heat and the energetic shift in me when all the needles hook up together. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you can talk about that a little bit, because that feels incredibly magical to me, and it's a magic that's in my body.
Right. Well, there are a lot of lines of energy. There are 12 major lines of energy that are talked about in the body. There are actually many more, but the 12 channels are sometimes translated as meridians. The Chinese word is luo. And there are 10 for the different organ systems, plus 2 more. One that runs up the front of the body, one that runs down the back of the body. Down the front, up the back. Anyhow, and so, generally speaking, in an acupuncture treatment, you are inserting needles into those points, where the energy tends to collect or pool along those meridians. And so, for instance, if I am needling a point called Tai Chi, which is down on your ankle, on the kidney channel, and then also a point on your wrist called Neguan, which is on the inside of your wrist, those points will, because you're simply because you're affecting them, they'll have a communication with one another. And it is through these meridians that run all over the body. In this particular case, there's the kidney channel and the pericardium channel, which is often how you affect the heart, because the heart is a very temperamental organ. Again, it's fire, right? You stoke up the fire, sparks fly everywhere. So you often will use the Shinbao, which is heart protector or pericardium. You'll use that channel to address the heart, especially on the emotional level. And so what happens is that you're activating these channels, and qi flows through all of these channels throughout the day. There are times when it's higher, there are times when it's lower. The 12-hour day, and I refer to the 12 hours as what we see as 24 hours, but Chinese hours are 2 hours long. Japanese hours are 2 hours long, come from the same system. And the qi actually peaks in each of the channels over these, so it flows in peaks through, it's flowing through all the channels all the time, but it's strongest in certain channels throughout the day. So at the middle of the day, getting back to the heart again, it's strongest in the heart. So I will then select, if I'm treating somebody at noon or between 11 and 1, I'll often select a point on the heart channel because that's where the qi is strongest. I get the body's attention. And then it's also where the qi is strongest so that the qi can then flow. I'm activating the qi. I'm opening up the body. And then as I needle other points in the body, I'm connecting all of them together to affect what is hopefully a unified treatment. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I can only treat one thing at a time, because I can often address multiple things at once, and I usually try to. But I can have a unified treatment in the fact that I can treat the body, the person. As a mentor of mine likes to say, we don't treat this disease. Somebody will call her up and say, do you treat shoulder pain? She says, no, I don't treat shoulder pain. I treat people with shoulder pain. And it's always getting back to the patient, getting back to the one, the unified source. And I find often one of the sensations that I'm looking for when I'm needling somebody is this heavy sensation. It's not uncomfortable burning, but it is kind of that tingly, warm burn that is called the qi sensation. And, getting back to the fire that is qi, because qi is, I think, more like magical fire than it is like any other magical element, except for perhaps ether. But, and so I've got the qi, it's this warm sensation, this heavy sensation that is, then it's very easy to direct once you're aware of it. Once I can feel it in the body with my fingers, I can feel it through the needle, this sensation of qi. And often, if there's a huge accumulation, I will actually get that qi sensation, and then I will, with my intention. And this is another thing that's very, very important. It was driven home to me very early in my training in Chinese medicine. Your intention is very important. Just like you can direct magical energy, magical fire with your intention, you have to direct the qi with your intention, even in somebody else's body. And so I will have the qi gathered or accumulated around the needle, and then I will point the qi where it needs to go. And I will often needle perpendicularly until I can feel that qi sensation, or until my patient says, I feel this sensation. And then I will lift the needle out and angle it slightly in the direction it needs to go, whether it needs to just be out of the area that it's overaccumulated or pointing it into an area where it's deficient. And then I can use the needle, and in certain ways, actually, the needle is like using an athame. You're using that to then direct it. And it's... I hadn't actually thought of that parallel, but the needle is like a little athame because it's got a handle and it's sharp and it goes, and you can use it to help direct energy.
That's really fascinating. I definitely think of scalpels, needles, all of those as athames. I think that because healing is so magical, and healing is, as you said, about intention and direction of will, and opening. And I use those parallels often when I'm teaching people who are very uncomfortable wielding knives. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like, well, you wield a knife when you cook your dinner, and, you know, the surgeon, you really want the surgeon to have a really sharp scalpel.
Absolutely.
Right? So we want to have sharp knives. We want to hone our will, our intention.
Right. And remember, too, that the fire of your will is what, to blend these two traditions together. The fire of your will, fire controls metal.
Right.
So it's, you know, the fire of your will is controlling the metal of the knife.
Right.
So that properly wielded with your will, the knife should not do anything that you don't want it to do. Mm-hmm. And that also means training. And whether that's a friend of mine just asked me to teach her knife skills because I have a background in cooking. And it's the same thing. It's you need to practice with the knife in order to get that well-developed will so that it does what you want, not something you don't want.
Right. The other thing I'm thinking of here is in hearing you talk about how the energy systems and the chi works in the body. You were talking about treating a kidney point at the ankle, and I'm thinking of how magically we love to work with macrocosms and microcosms, and, you know, we love to map the human body on the whole Kabbalist tree, knowing that that's also a map of the universe, or the world tree in heathen lore. All of those parallels are becoming really clear to me, that in treating the whole body, you're not, when you're treating the kidneys, you're not placing needles on the kidneys necessarily.
Right.
You know, there's the foot, of course, maps the whole body. The face maps the whole body. And I'm thinking that this is also something that magicians, mathematicians, and artists have worked with for centuries in the West as well. I'm thinking of the golden ratio. Mm-hmm. You know, how the pentagram of the body is all in this perfect proportion, and it seems like the same thing applies in Chinese medicine.
Yeah. Funny you should mention that. We talk constantly about microcosms. The ear looks like, if you have a very vivid imagination or taking lots of drugs, the ear looks like an upside-down person or a fetus, coiled upside down with the head down by the earlobe and then the feet up by the kind of curled around the top of the concha, the outer part of the ear. So we find in Chinese medicine, we find microcosms everywhere. There's a Korean version of acupuncture which only uses the hands, where the middle finger represents the head, and then the two fingers next to it represent the arms, and the outer fingers represent the legs. Of course, you see reflexology charts all over the place that have the whole body mapped onto it. Every part of the body, every unit of the body, every bone can have the entire body mapped onto it. And so we have the opportunity, that gives us as practitioners, Chinese medicine practitioners, also us as magicians, to map the body or the entire universe onto anything we need, you know, on anything that is appropriate.
Right.
So, you know, you can, just like I can treat somebody's head by needling their feet, because the body is also mapped onto itself upside down. I can treat somebody's headaches by needling the bottom of their feet. Mm-hmm. You know, I can treat a backache by needling a point on the back of the hand. These are, you know, those microcosms are very useful. Magically, you could do the same thing. You know, if you wanted to work some energy healing on yourself, you wanted to work some magical healing on yourself, there's no reason why you couldn't use your hand to represent an inaccessible point on your body, especially the internal organs. You know, you obviously, if you have a cold and you're having breathing trouble, obviously you can't reach in and touch your lungs, but you can work with points on your hands to then, you know, magically. This is not a Chinese medicine discussion at this point, but you know, you could magically work on maybe your hands where you would imagine the lungs to be if you turned your hand into a body, and you know, you could do that to help magically help heal your lungs. And one of the things I really enjoy doing ear acupuncture for that reason. As you know, I'm in my training, I learned, 400 points or so, 360 regular points, plus a bunch of others. But I like the ear because the ear is so responsive. It's made up of this very special tissue that often it will tell you what's going on. I mean, you'll see a discolored spot on the ear, and especially if you see somebody over and over and over again, it's not a birthmark, it's not, you'll see a discolored point on the ear, and you'll say, oh, okay, well, this corresponds to the middle of your back, and you can say, hey, are you having any back pain? They're like, oh yeah, I've been sitting kind of funny in my back, and you put the needle in there, and ears are really sensitive, so usually they'll jerk a little bit because it's the needle insertion is the ear acupuncture is really pleasant, but the insertions can be a little tough just because there are so many nerve endings in the ears. But I find that the ear is a great microcosm, and I can intuit it a lot more easily. I grok it a lot better than I would if it were the whole body is a little bit more intellectual. When I'm doing body acupuncture, there's a lot of art to it. There's a lot of magic to it, but there's a huge intellectual engagement just because I need to know that Susanli is, which is a point on the upper leg or the lower leg, upper part of the lower leg, helps with your immune response. I know that intellectually. I can translate the name and get the story behind it, but since my Chinese isn't all that good, it actually makes more sense to just have learned that intellectually, and then the need for to then make that intellectual connection, and then use my creativity to make connections between the points in designing a treatment. That's where the creativity comes in.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like working with just the ear, you're able to tap more cleanly into your intuition? Or is it simply because it's an easier map?
I would say, yes and no. I can definitely have that entirely intuitive experience. I spent 3 months doing almost nothing but ears during my training. And one of the things I found was that I would often feel it has that, and I've had this also with body acupuncture, but more often with ear acupuncture, I'll just feel a point call to me. I'll have that huge, I must do this, and not know why. And often not know until either I have an opportunity to interview the patient afterwards and say, hey, what's going on here? Or sometimes it's not even that. Sometimes it'll just be simply, I need to needle this point. Okay, well, let's see, what is that point? What are some of the more esoteric uses of that point? And then find out later on that, okay, this point was actually really good for this. That happens more often with the ear. I think because, like you said, it's a little bit of an easier map, so that allows you to let your intellect go a little bit more.
Right.
Also, because it's such a small space, the signs are a lot more subtle. So I may be picking things up on a subconscious level that I'm not really noticing consciously. And again, the subconscious tapping into the intuition. I have this, there's a dynamic there as well.
Another question I have for you is about energy bodies. I do some amount of energy healing work, and work not only with the physical body, but with the etheric body and the aura, those different energy bodies that surround us. And I'm wondering how much, you mentioned earlier that Chinese medicine in the classical sense can work from the physical through the emotional to the spiritual. And I'm wondering how much you've been able to tap into that of picking a point on the body that's actually helping to treat something further out in one of the energy bodies.
Absolutely. Let's see.
I'm asking you a complicated question here.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me think. There are a number of circumstances that I've had where I've been, and this is a lot during my training, where I was very fortunate to have a very good friend who was also a witch, and I worked a lot with her while I was doing my training. So we're worked very closely, got to practice on each other a lot. So we got to play with a couple of these things in and around studying in a graduate program. So it was not as much as maybe either one of us would have liked. But there are a number of points. There's an entire row of points along the back on the urinary bladder channel, which all have to do with the spiritual aspects, and the spiritual and emotional aspects of those. So each of the organs have spirits associated with them, the term is best translated as spirit. And so there's the corporeal soul, there's the etheric soul, or the non-corporeal soul, depending on how you want to translate that. There is what's translated as the spirit, which is the shen of the heart, which I talked about earlier. There's the will, the zhi, which resides in the kidneys. And so you have this opportunity to affect both those emotions, because all of those organs have emotions associated with them. I talked about heart and this exuberant joy. Right. Mania might be a better term for it, but also the spiritual aspect for, again, talking about the will, the zhi, which is that will to go on living, which is contained in the kidneys and is released by the kidneys. So there are points. A lot of this information is you have to intuit because it's been more or less systematically taken out of Chinese medicine, both in China and in the U.S. There's some resistance. I'm not claiming that I'm oppressed by practicing classical Chinese medicine or anything.
Witness the violence inherent in the system.
Exactly. But there is a sense of you do have to dig deeply to find it, and you have to look at the names of the points. The points will often tell you what they are, rather than, that's one of the reasons why in this discussion I've been talking about the names of the points rather than the numbers, because I can also say, for instance, Tai Chi, the point on the ankle on the kidney channel, it can also be described as kidney 3. But kidney 3 doesn't explain what it is.
Right. Names are keys,
exactly.
Which is true in magical practice as well.
Exactly.
Right.
So sometimes you have to go digging into the history of those points and the history of the names, because the names have changed over time too, making it even more difficult. But you can go and say, okay, well this point's name is Spirit Gate. Which spirit? You have to look at the character. Which spirit does that mean? Okay, well it means the spirit of the heart. So this is one that will help calm that mania, and it's a spiritual. So it is kind of a spiritual calming down. I can use another point to activate the zhi, so that somebody can, the will, so that somebody can then, often helps with depression with people. I unfortunately haven't taken the opportunity yet to then work with somebody to say, okay, well, you're relatively healthy, but let's try and take you up to that next level as a magician.
Right.
How does activating these points, needling these points, how does that affect your growth as a magical practitioner?
Sounds like a fascinating study. It needs to be born.
We can talk later.
That's really cool. Yeah. So to close, this has been a great discussion. I'm so grateful for it. And I'm going to ask you another question that you may not be able to answer. Is there one point on, say, our hand that we could press ourselves that would help bring greater balance to that fire and water you were talking about earlier? Or is that going to be different for everybody depending on where we are?
In general, it'll be different depending on where you are. But if I had to select one point, I would actually suggest, if you're to balance that fire and water, I would probably select Shenmen, which is, again, that spirit gate. And that's an easy point that you could press. It's more about calming that excessive fire. But I think that probably a little bit more appropriate in our culture, as people get manic, and work is pulling at you and the kids are pulling at you or whatever else you've got going on in your life, you're ready to kill your roommate, whatever. And that point is on the outside of your wrist. So if you follow your pinky finger down on the fleshy side, on the palm side of your hand, just to where it drops in past your wrist crease. And you'll be able to feel the tendon there. And on the middle side of the tendon, so the side that's closer to your thumb, the point is actually underneath that tendon. But you spending a few minutes just really working in there and massaging it may get a little bit sore, which probably means that it needs some attention. And self-massage is a great way just to explore what your body is doing energetically anyway. But I would probably choose that Shenmen point to kind of calm down on days when things are you're feeling like your head's exploding and your heart's beating too fast and you're just kind of going crazy. And I would probably choose that point. It's kind of one point that I would recommend that people, again, when you have an excess condition, not when you're, even when you're in a condition of your kidneys, your base being too low, this will still take some of the pressure off because, of course, that excess fire will also overheat the water.
Right.
Because they have that relationship to one another. So you can even take some of the pressure off if the real problem is underneath. And then, of course, take care of yourself. So if you need to take a weekend off, I'd suggest doing it.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much for coming in, Scott.
Thanks for having me, Thorn.
Again, you can find Scott's work at rootbranchom.com, and I'm available at thorncoyle.com. Let's all take another deep breath together from the soles of our feet to the crown of our head. And let's thank all the elements, air, fire, water, earth, and ether. And say, Holy Mother, in whom we live, move, and have our being, from you all things emerge, and unto you all things return. And as usual, I have a lot of things coming up. Check the calendar page of my website. And in between things, I'll try to get more rest. Blessed be.
And rock solid, oh, you lovers, stand with me.